good. So I don't know how I follow up an AP saving a life. I don't have any stories. I don't know any documented or recorded stories of our research actually saving someone's life, but that's definitely a pretty cool story. I'd like to thank Extreme for having me here today, and I'd like to thank all of you for coming to participate and listen in. As Norman said, what I'd like to do over the next few minutes is just give you an idea of what we're seeing from the surveys that we do, the research that we do. So these are your peers, and what they're seeing in terms of the key initiatives that are driving and changing their IT landscape, some of the challenges that they report, and also how these initiatives are impacting the network. And lastly, I'll finish up with areas that organizations have found where the network can help enable and drive the business. So hopefully provide you with a little bit of insight there. I'm going to start with some data from an annual IT spending survey that we do. We've been doing this for about a dozen years or more now, and it's really helpful in trying to figure out where the overall industry is at a point in time and where it's going. And for a point of reference, this is 651, some odd of your closest friends and family, across enterprise and mid-market. We define mid-market 100 to 999, enterprise 1,000 and above, across North America and Western Europe. And what we wanted to do is take a look at and see what the key initiatives and where people were with them. So to get started, the primary one is cloud. So I assume, how many people here have a cloud that they're using? Raise your hand. Interactive portion. So a good number of you. How many of you have multiple public clouds that you're using? All right, still a fair number. The interesting part from this survey, when we asked organizations, are you using multiple public clouds? And this is not including software as a service. This is strictly infrastructure as a service and platform as a service. 81% of the respondents said that they have a multi-cloud environment. And in fact, you can see 46% reported that they were running some form or fashion a production app in the cloud as well. So some of you may look at this and say, all right, is this the end? Does this mean I'm not going to have a data center anymore? Everything's going to the cloud and multiple cloud environments? Well, the reality is no. Another piece of the research, when we asked, 41% of organizations came back and said, we've actually pulled something back. We've pulled a workload back from the cloud. So we found that to be really interesting, and later, over the course of this year of 2018, we went out and we specifically looked at that 41%, those people, those organizations who had brought back something from the cloud. And it was really interesting. Anyone here have a cloud-first initiative? No, not too many. That's good, because what we found was when organizations were bringing it back, there was a much higher incidence of pulling a workload back when you had a cloud-first initiative. Something to the effect of 53% of organizations that brought a workload back had a cloud-first versus maybe 39% that had a more balanced approach. The other interesting thing that we found, and this will be good for all of you in IT, this is probably something you've been telling your organization for a long time now, and that is for organizations that pulled back multiple workloads, it was really interesting to see that 70% of those workloads were initiated by shadow IT. All right? So that means that you've got there's been a lot of exuberance around the cloud. A lot of people have mandated we need to go there first. But what we're seeing is that two things. One, cloud is here to stay. That's a given. But it's going to be a hybrid cloud environment. You're going to have your data center, and you're going to be connecting to multiple clouds. And the best way to do that is not to get too enamored one way or the other, but to take a fair and balanced approach as to which workloads belong in the cloud, which ones belong in your data center as it pertains to data security, governance, regulations, etc. So again, what we're seeing is a lot of organizations leveraging the cloud, but taking a more balanced approach and going to be developing out hybrid clouds. The next piece is around IoT. So there's a lot of talk. You heard Ed up here earlier showing some of those stats, 23 billion connected devices, etc. What's interesting for us when we look at the data from IoT is the numbers that are being reported. So today, 25% of organizations saying they have an IoT initiative underway, and another 43% planning to roll something out over the next 12 to 24 months. The reason we find this interesting, when we look at most models that we create around maturity, it tends to be that first 20% are those leading adopters. Then there's the next 60 that are the followers, and then the last 20 are the far more conservative. So what we're seeing with IoT is it really starting to enter the mainstream. The other interesting piece around IoT is obviously the need for that network connectivity that IoT is driving. Because a lot of these devices, the IoT sensors, aren't going to be deployed in your data center. They're going to be at the edge, the far edge. They're going to be in very remote locations. And the reality is all of these devices are transmitting information that need to be sent somewhere. So we're looking to see IoT as it rolls out and has a much greater impact on organizations and on the network. The last piece on the slide is about transformation. And so clearly digital transformation is something that has a tremendous amount of buzz in the industry. Our research tends to focus a little bit more on the solidity of, are you actually doing something about it? So it's not, are you interested in digital transformation, but do you have a mature digital transformation underway? And keep in mind, when we say digital transformation, it's about people, process, and technology. But what we found is that in order for a true digital transformation to occur, a lot of times you're going to need to revamp that underlying infrastructure to support those new processes to become more agile and responsive. So what was interesting was that only 13% said they had a mature digital transformation initiative underway. So that should make all of you feel pretty good if you don't have one or you're just starting. And the majority of the respondents, 61%, said we're just getting things going, right? There's been a lot of hype. You're now getting to the point where the rubber meets the road. And over the next couple of years, we anticipate that you'll see a lot more of this IT transformation enabling that digital transformation. The other interesting piece around transformation that we see is that the pendulum, I'll call it the IT pendulum, is swinging from consolidated to distributed. All right, how many people remember the early 2000s when every headline was we went from 85 data centers down to 6, from 100 down to 7, right? There was a huge transformation going on then, almost 20 years ago now, that drove everything back to a data center. And now what we see is that pendulum swinging back out. You start hearing not about data centers, but centers of data. You've got the cloud that you're distributing workloads to. And you see IoT as being one of those big drivers of that distributed compute environment. Because as I think it was Ed was talking about, or Ed or Norm, who was talking about the grocery store? Ed. Ed was talking about the grocery store and trying to find whether people were satisfied or unsatisfied. In order for that to happen, that's not data that gets transmitted from a camera back 1,000 miles to a data center or up to a cloud, wherever that may be. That's something that has to happen in real time on site. So you're seeing a lot of these IoT applications driving that edge compute and the need for that edge analytics so that you can have real time. And that holds true whether you're a service provider and you're looking to provide location-based services and real-time offer management. So when someone's walking down the street, you can make an offer to go into a Starbucks. Doesn't do any good when you're 100 yards past Starbucks to get the offer to go in and get a 2-for-1 special. So we're starting to see these things having a real impact. And again, from a networking perspective, if you've got infrastructure out at the edge, and even if you're doing that real-time analysis, it's not like you're going to keep all that data there. You're going to keep enough infrastructure there so that you can process things on a daily basis, but then you're going to take all that data and you're going to ship it back to your data lake or data ocean at a data center or up in the cloud. So clearly a lot of things going on from a transformational perspective. This I thought was a really interesting data point that I wanted to share, and it just really speaks to organizations' mindset and that need for transformation and the fact that transformation is happening faster and faster as we progress. And you can see here the vast majority are basically saying that if we don't embrace this transformation, we're going to be left behind. And I think this has always been the case for transformations over time. The big difference now is that these transformations are occurring faster and faster. Oops. So when we look at how that boils down in this overall survey that we did and how it impacts the network, obviously with all these needs, desires to connect up IoT devices, to connect to the cloud, it's creating a lot more complexity. So it shouldn't be a surprise that organizations are coming back and saying, this is great, but what I really need to do is streamline this environment. And the key is that it's not just the infrastructure, it's also operations. If you've got data center, campus, wireless, the edge, et cetera, you're not going to want to have multiple disparate management units. You want to be able to streamline that. You want to be able to drive enhanced productivity. And so organizations are seeing that and they're saying, what I really need to be able to do as things are getting more complex is I need solutions that are going to help me streamline and make my life a lot easier. When we went out and asked organizations how they were justifying their IT purchases for the year, this came back as the top three. So improved security, no surprises, right? Everyone's aware of all the threats, especially as you start adding IoT devices and you've got a much larger attack surface. These are all areas that organizations have to be aware of. So security is still leading the way with the justification for their IT purchases. And then again, you see that improved productivity. So organizations realize they're going to have a more complex environment. They realize they're not going to get additional resources. So they know they have to make the resources that they have a lot more productive. So what kind of solutions can we buy that are going to help drive our employee productivity? And then lastly, and this was something that Ed touched on upon a lot, and Mike as well, and that was around customer experience. How do we deliver a better customer experience? So much around digital transformation is about being able to provide a better digital experience for your customers, for your employees. The interesting part about this justification, when we do our surveys, it's usually 20-something different verticals that we cover in that space. If we were to look at it, do we have anyone here from healthcare or education in the room? Okay, so a fair number. If we were to put that up for you specifically, that would flip. Customer experience was the #1 justification for IT purchases. And it's not that hard to imagine. Even I just, like yourself, going through your daughter heading off to Boston College. My daughter just started as a freshman. We actually last week on the panel had someone from Southern Illinois University. And what you're seeing is that the wireless connectivity, the connections across the entire campus, is becoming a point of differentiation for these universities. So that when these students come in, and it's no longer with 1 or 2 devices, but 6, 7, 8, that they've got a solid experience and a great experience with their Wi-Fi devices. And that actually becomes a differentiator in attracting students to those universities. For healthcare, it's probably even more important, right? It's the ability to spin up those customer records and the health records so that they can be seen. So just a little something for you to think about and how maybe you're justifying your IT purchases and what we're seeing in the field. I'm going to switch gears now and go to a different survey that we had conducted last year. And this was around about 300 or so respondents from North America only, again, split 70-30, enterprise and mid-market. And we drilled down a little bit to ask them about the challenges that they were having and about the impact to the network from some of these key initiatives. So again, not a big surprise on the top of the list. I'm sure everyone, who's got unlimited budget? Raise your hand. All right. So, someone, where's the salespeople? Find that man. So budget constraints are clearly something that's going to be difficult, especially when you're in a time of transformation. This is that proverbial trying to rebuild the airplane while it's flying. Most of the time your budget's good enough to keep the lights on, but it doesn't consider that investment. So as a result of that, what becomes far more important is that you as an organization are able to look at viable alternatives, right? Things like total cost of ownership and the value are going to become more important as you look to bring in new solutions that drive that customer satisfaction, that drive greater employee productivity for you. And that's how you start to overcome some of those budget constraints. Security, again, great, not a surprise for any of you. I'm sure you're all very familiar with the fact that security is a significant issue. And then the next one is around the difficulties in provisioning network services and devices. So those were 2 of them. I consolidated a little bit, but that becomes really important as your organization progresses in this digital transformation. You need to be more agile. I assume some of you are doing DevOps as well. Anyone read the book, The Phoenix Project? If you haven't, it's a really cool easy read about DevOps and the IT infrastructure and the impact. Some of you reading it might hit too close to home, but it's a really fun and easy read if you want to check that out. The end of the day is we just need to, as IT, need to be able to provide an infrastructure that supports the rapidly changing business. And then the last thing I'm going to touch upon on this slide is really around the skill sets and the ability to have knowledge around new technologies. And this is something that you see every time there's some type of transformation. There's always a dearth in organizations or in individuals that have the appropriate skill sets. And what this really points to is organizations thinking about and changing their mindset. And what does it mean for the networking space? It's really a shift from CLI-based commands into network automation. Right? Think about how do I become more productive? How do I deliver a better experience with the network? And it's really about how do I get trained? So who are the partners that you're going to work with? How do you get your teams up-leveled, upskilled to be able to accommodate the new technologies that are coming out, to be able to not only take advantage of network automation, but be able to help drive and be a champion for that within your organization. So I told you I would talk about some of the impacts. In this case, it's what are the impacts of the cloud? And you can see the very first one is organizations are looking to integrate their data center and cloud networks. As I mentioned earlier, we're looking at an environment where you're going to have a cloud or multiple public clouds that you need to connect to. We're seeing that workloads are going up and coming back. So that ability to have a seamless interconnect between the data center and the cloud is something that's going to, or multiple clouds, is going to be increasingly important. The need for increased connectivity to our cloud providers. And the interesting part here is that this is not just the data center to the cloud connectivity, but more and more, if any of you have remote locations and branch offices, you're connecting those directly to the cloud as well. Right? Organizations are not backhauling everything through the data center and up to the cloud anymore. They're starting to go direct from those remote locations. As a result of that, you can see we need more security, especially out at those edge locations. If we're going to be going direct and we're not backhauling everything, we now need to make sure that we're fully protected even out at the edge. Some of the other areas that we see as well, I'm sure all of you are familiar with having to refactor your applications in order to put them in the cloud. And in some cases, when organizations can't refactor their applications, what we're seeing them do is actually move the pieces of infrastructure and the workloads that can't be moved into colo facilities right next to the cloud to try and minimize any latency for those organizations. Taking a look at IoT, I find this one interesting because it's not, when you look at the first impact, it's not related to actual physical network. Instead, what you're seeing is that we're all concerned about operations. If we go from 0 to 23 billion devices in our environment, how do we make sure they're connected, secured? How is the workload? How's our staff going to be able to handle all these increased devices? And this is especially true as you start merging OT and IT. Right? Or if you're in manufacturing, you've got these plants, you've had sensors for a long time, but they've been on a separate and distinct network. How do you make sure that when you put them all together, that you've got visibility across them, that you make sure, as you can see in the second point, that they're all secured? I'm sure by now everyone's heard of the thermostat in the casino fish tank that got hacked because someone went and plugged it in to the corporate network. So instead of it being segmented and secure, a hacker was able to get through the thermostat and get into the corporate records and download all the information on all the high rollers. So those are some of the, obviously it seems pretty simple, but obviously it's still very much a concern and can lead to huge consequences if you don't take care of it. And then you can see in the third data point is around the fact that IoT devices are going to require more connectivity. So now we get to that physical network. And that's what I had talked about earlier. As you move some of that compute out, as you do some of that crunching at the edge, you're still going to need to send that back somewhere. So what's going to be the impact of once you download and deploy all these devices and sensors on the overall network when you start transmitting that data across? When we look at how we can help a digital transformation, again, we start with that security. The very first thing, we need to make sure we're not going to have a data breach. We need to make sure we're not going to have, and fortunately we're not staying in a Marriott hotel. Otherwise, all of you might be looking at your email, checking to see if you've lost your information. So clearly, security, again, is something that's going to provide and be a differentiator for organizations. But just as important, you can see, enabling that high-speed connectivity end-to-end. So if we're going to transform, if we're going to do this, we need to make sure that we've got end-to-end connectivity across our entire environment. And we need to make sure that all our applications are performing extremely well. As you can see, a nod to the data center and the fact that the data center is not going away. We need to make sure that we can have great application performance. And then the last two are really around making sure we've got good customer experience. How can we connect to our customers and our clients, and how can we ensure that we provide them with a good experience? So you should see by now, through going through some of these slides, there's starting to be this recurring theme around making sure we've got connectivity, making sure it's secure, and making sure we've got a better experience. It wouldn't be a research presentation if I didn't have at least one eye chart. So hopefully you can read this, but the idea behind this, if you can't read it, what this is showing is the network capabilities that will help grow a business. And it's segmented from today and 24 months from today. So again, you see security far and away today being the primary driver on helping our organization. And I don't know that that's necessarily helping it grow as much as it's saying it's helping us have a really bad experience, avoid having a really bad experience. The second data point is really around collecting data. So you heard earlier talking a lot about analytics. This is the need to make sure that you've got a lot of valuable information on your network. How do you collect that? And make sure you're using it to your advantage. Again, IoT rears its head 2 years out, corresponds to what we saw earlier with organizations rolling it out over the next 12 to 24 months, seeing the need to be able to respond to IoT devices. Towards the bottom, you see, again, a big differentiation for 2 years out in how we connect to the cloud. And then in the bottom, greater adoption of location-aware, location-based services being provided through the network. And overall, this just points to a need that the network is becoming a lot more relevant. And hopefully, what you're seeing on this slide is starting to come true in your organization as well. And that is the need for greater analytics so we can better, again, serve our users, provide a better experience, and the fact that the network is becoming a strategic asset. So this was something that I had talked about earlier in the year in 2018 about the network becoming more relevant. And as the years progressed, I would say we've seen that only continue and grow. In fact, as I've gone through the course of this year, attended many shows, talked to a lot of your peers across the industry, I was taken at one particular show I was at where an organization stood up and said that we've actually reimagined our IT group. We don't have IT anymore. We have a connectivity and compute group. And I thought that was really interesting and really compelling, especially as you think about all these initiatives driving the need for the network connectivity. But I thought he missed just slightly on that, and that it's not about having compute. Everyone knows you have to have compute. It's about that compute being able to deliver the applications, being able to enable that machine-to-machine connectivity, et cetera, and deliver a good experience. So what I would like to leave you with today is the fact as you think about your IT group, as you think about moving forward, it's not about being the networking team in an IT group. It's really all about how do you present yourselves as a connectivity and experience group to enable all the people, applications, machines, et cetera, within your environment. And with that, I would like to thank you very much, and I think we're going to head to the customer panel next. Thank you.